Thank you so much for having me here today. It is a pleasure. I am really young, in case you hadn't noticed. And so I am fresh out of college, which means I get asked the question a lot. What do you do for a living, right? I'm at the hair salon, and the lady says to me, what do you do for a living? And I spent months hating that question. Because I work for a national pro-life organization, okay? I talk about abortion all day, every day. And so how do I answer that question in a way that starts this conversation off on the right foot if she's pro-choice? Because I'm more than happy to go talk about abortion. Okay, this is what I do. But I want this conversation with this hairstylist to go well. And so how do I answer the question, what do I do for a living, in a way that's gonna start this conversation off on the right foot? That stumped me for a very long time. And this is what I finally settled on. If someone says to me, what do you do for a living? I say, well, I help pro-life people to be less weird. Every single time. That is the exact reaction that they have. They kind of chuckle to themselves and they look at me with this puzzled face and they're like, what does that mean? And I say, well, I help pro-life people to make more good arguments and fewer bad ones. And I help us to connect relationally with people who are different from us so that we can actually engage with their ideas. It's a really strange job, I recognize that. But I think it is so needed in our society today because in case you hadn't noticed, we are incredibly bad at actually engaging with people on the other side. Like, abortion has always been a difficult topic to talk about. It's emotionally complicated, it's ethically and philosophically complicated, which we're gonna talk about a lot today. But these days, it seems like we can't have a conversation about anything. It is quite frankly depressing to me to see how polarized our society has become. And I'm really aware that there really aren't any good examples, like in the media, of people who can actually engage with someone on the other side well. I think this is the problem on every side of politics. I think there are people on the right that are really, really bad at engaging with people on the left, and they just make it sound like they think people on the left are all stupid. And there's people on the left who treat people on the right like think they're all stupid. Like, just turn on MSNBC, okay? It is a disaster. Our political discourse is a complete disaster, and I want to fix that. I am particularly passionate about helping the right side of politics to be better at engaging with the left because I consider myself on the right side of politics, so I recognize this is also a problem on the left, but I get particularly peeved when I see people on the right engaging in negative behavior because I think it is hurting our side. I am literally here because I want to reform the pro-life movement. I want the pro-life movement to actually be able to reach pro-choice people. Because right now, it seems like we just enjoy making fun of the other side, frankly, because of the kinds of things we watch. I think that we all enjoy way too much watching our favorite political commentator, whoever that is, take on a group of stupid people from the other side, because there's some part of us that's like, yeah, serves them right, those stupid idiots. Like, we like that. We like to watch Ben Shapiro take on a whole room of idiot woke people. That is not helpful. Please stop. Like, I actually think that is hurting your soul. You should not be listening to people who make you think the other side is dumb, bad, or the enemy. Because it is a lot more complicated than that, folks. Like, if I'm talking to a pro-choice person, I am very pro-life, okay? I work for a national pro-life organization. I do not think that the pro-choice person I'm talking to is dumb. I think pro-choice people have really good arguments for what they think. I think they're flawed. And I have a lot of good reasons for that, but I don't think they're dumb. I think they have thought through their position. And I certainly don't think that they're my enemy. I think we need less hate and more dialogue in our society. Thank you. And I am trying to encourage that in the pro-life movement. We need more dialogue among friends and less debate among strangers on Twitter. That is exactly what ERI, Equal Rights Institute, specializes in. We try to help pro-life people to actually engage in dialogue with people on the other side. In other words, we try to help pro-life people to think clearly, reason honestly, and argue persuasively. Think clearly. That doesn't just mean that I'm going to give you answers to pro-choice arguments, though I will do some of that. That means that I want pro-life people to actually be able to think through pro-choice arguments on their own. I want you to be able to understand what pro-choice people think so well that you can actually respond to it yourself. You don't have to just memorize some talking points that I'm going to give you. I think the more I've worked in the pro-life movement, talking to pro-choice people, the more I've realized that there is just this profound cultural gap between them. Like, pro-life person says A, and pro-choice person hears B. Or pro-choice person says X, and pro-life person hears Y. It's kind of like our brains do Google Translate. Have you ever seen those really funny YouTube videos where somebody takes the lyrics to a famous song like Let It Go, and they translate it using Google Translate from English to Spanish, and Spanish to French, and French to Mandarin Chinese, and then back to English, and then they sing it, and it's absolutely hilarious. Because Google Translate gets it wrong, right? We all know this. I think that is exactly what happens in our brains when we hear pro-choice arguments. We think we understand pro-choice people, but we really don't most of the time. And most of the time, they don't understand us either. And so what ends up happening is our brains do this Google Translate and we get it wrong, and then we're like talking past each other. And that is not helping anyone. So I want to help pro-life people to think about this well themselves. Argue persuasively, that's pretty self-explanatory. I want pro-life people to make really good arguments that can actually change pro-choice people's minds. But when I say that we try to help pro-life people reason honestly, people don't really know what that means. What I mean by reason honestly is that I think pro-life people should be open-minded too. When I tell pro-life people that they should be open-minded about abortion, they freak out. Okay, a couple of years ago, my boss, Josh Brom, was doing a podcast called Life Report. And in this particular episode, he wanted to do one on the idea of open-mindedness. Like, what is open-mindedness? Is it a good thing? Is it a virtue? What is its opposite? All these kinds of questions. And so he wanted to also give this episode kind of a controversial title. He didn't want to call it, should pro-choice people be open-minded? Because most pro-life people would be like, well, duh, because they're obviously wrong. And so he called it, should pro-lifers be open-minded too? And lifenews.com ran our podcast and accompanying article. And they didn't change the title, which we were kind of shocked by. And so we logged on to Life News a couple of days later, and we read 150 comments. 2 of which were positive. The other 148 were people that had just read the title and their heads exploded and they had to say what they were thinking to the entire world because apparently that's what we do these days. The other 2 people were people that had actually read the article or listened to the podcast. I want to read you some of the actual social media comments under that Life News piece. Should pro-lifers be open-minded too? Absolutely no. Absolutely no, because if you say it in all caps, that makes it better. No, murder is murder. Abortion is murder. No, there should be no room for discussion on the topic of brutally murdering a helpless baby. If open-mindedness means thinking it's okay to rip a baby to pieces, then no. Should we be open-minded if someone comes to murder you? That's my favorite one. No, sir. On this issue, I remain very close-minded. Discussion over. You can't be open-minded when dealing with Satan. Also good. Only an idiot would think like that. Nope, closed-minded. That is us pro-life Christian conservatives, and proud of it. Absolutely. Open-minded to enlightening the ignorant and selfish. I'm open-minded to the idea that abortion is murder. As Archie Bunker once said, I do have an open mind. I just close it when I know I'm right. And then we also had 3 people who made the exact same joke. Not so open-minded that your brains fall out. No, if you're too open-minded, your brains fall out. Open-minded that it is sin ruling the pro-abortionist, but not so open-minded that your brains fall out. Then there were actually 2 substantive comments that I actually want to respond to. How can you be wishy-washy over the murder of a child? Stop being a wimp. Say it like it is. Abortion is wrong at any time after conception. It is as easy as that. And we are wishy-washy wimps if we say anything else. Quit doing it halfway. No, I do not want your brains to fall out. Let me explain what I mean by being open-minded. Have you ever been wrong about something? Bonus points if you can think of like a serious moral issue that you changed your mind about after learning more. That does not mean having no convictions. It simply means having the humility to believe something for good reasons, not because you're just too stubborn to believe anything else. If you're actually open-minded about an issue, that means that you're not afraid of engaging with what people on the other side think, because you're committed to following the truth where it leads. And if it turns out that you were wrong and the truth really is on the other side, you're going to change your mind because you care about truth. That doesn't mean you have no convictions. I am pro-life because I genuinely think that that is where the truth leads. I have explored all of the arguments. I have talked to the smartest people on the other side. I've read the craziest philosophy papers from the other side. I'm not afraid of doing that because I'm not afraid of being wrong. I'm not afraid of changing my mind. Because if the pro-life position is true, and I am awfully sure that it is, then that's where the truth is going to lead. But I'm not pro-life just because that's what my parents told me to be. I'm not pro-life just because that's what my church taught me to be. I'm pro-life because I actually looked into it. And I am committed to being open-minded. I think being open-minded is also good for pragmatic reasons as well. Imagine you're pro-choice, and someone is trying to change your mind about abortion. Not just any person, that person. If somebody says to me, nope, I'm closed-minded, that's us pro-life Christian conservatives and proud of it, how likely do you think it is that that pro-life person is going to change your mind about abortion? It ain't happening. Absolutely not. If you genuinely show that you want to understand pro-choice people, you want to really know what's driving their view, and yet you still don't become pro-choice, your view is fascinating to them. Because they find out you've actually taken the time to try to understand what the smartest pro-choice arguments are, what their pro-choice argument is, the person standing right in front of you. I think if you actually want to change pro-choice minds about abortion, you need to do all three of those things. You need to think clearly about it yourself. You need to be able to reason honestly. And you need to argue persuasively. If we're actually going to make any progress, you need to show that you are pro-life for good reasons. And you can explain it well. Not just because you're too stubborn to believe anything else. How do I know this? Why do I believe this? Quite frankly, I think the proof is in the pudding. I used to be absolutely terrified to tell people that I was pro-life. Let me back up a little bit. So I grew up Catholic, grew up pro-life, went to K-12 Catholic school, whole 9 yards, and I kind of knew that college was going to be a place where my beliefs would be challenged. Like, I knew that on the periphery of my mind. I had absolutely no idea what I was actually getting myself into. Absolutely no idea. I went to a very secular, very liberal campus in Minnesota called St. Olaf College, which is Lutheran in name only. It's not Lutheran. And let me paint a picture for you. The fall of my freshman year, our local pregnancy resource center called the Northfield Women's Center, wonderful place, love them so much. And they were hosting their annual fundraising banquet. They were actually doing it on the St. Olaf campus. They had rented out a ballroom, and that's like where they were hosting their banquet. And when the students on my campus found out about this, they managed to organize an absurd number of students to line the hallways of our student union with signs and yelling and screaming at all of these lovely, mostly elderly members of our community that were trying to come help support free resources for pregnant people in our community. That's what I walked into. Is anyone shocked that I was terrified to tell people I was pro-life? Okay, so I kept my mouth shut. And about January of my freshman year, my one good friend who was pro-life happened to see a poster for the pro-life club. There actually was one. There was a pro-life club on my campus, but it was being single-handedly run by one senior girl who was doing her best, like one woman pro-life show style, but how much can you do when that is your campus? Okay? And so my best friend Meredith saw this poster, and she dragged me, kicking and screaming, to my very first pro-life club meeting. The one senior girl, by the way, was absolutely thrilled when we showed up because we had just single-handedly tripled the size of her club from 1 to 3. And so that spring, we tried to do some stuff. And I'm going to be totally honest with you, every single thing that we tried failed epically. It was a complete disaster. I remember that spring we put up one hallway display. We rented out this whole hallway in the student union, and we had made this really fancy display, and we put it up, and it was vandalized 13 times in 1 week. And when I say vandalized, I mean destroyed, like completely destroyed. Whole thing is ripped down. We have to reprint the entire display and put it back up. I do not even want to know how much money we spent that week reprinting that display. It was a lot. And we would submit these bias reports to administration every single time, being like, hello, students are vandalizing our stuff and they can't do that, please help. And they would just go into a black hole. Like, I don't know if anyone ever read my bias reports. They're sitting somewhere in a file cabinet, presumably. End of my freshman year comes along, and that senior girl graduates. And suddenly, I find myself as the brand new president of the pro-life club by default, because there was no one else. And so that summer, my very tiny leadership team and I realized that something needed to change. Like, this was not working. But we had no idea what that was. And so that summer is when I got the email that quite literally changed my life forever. It's the email where I found out about Equal Rights Institute. So literally can say it changed my life forever because now I work for Equal Rights Institute, right? So it was actually an email from our local pregnancy center. They had discovered Equal Rights Institute and they were purchasing ERI's Equip for Life course, which I'm sure many of you have gone through in this room. I'm seeing tons of head nods, I love it. So they had purchased the Equip for Life course to put their staff and volunteers through, and they were wondering if our tiny pro-life club would like to also take it. We were like, absolutely. Free training on how to make better pro-life arguments and talk to pro-choice people? Yeah, we need that. And so I went through the Equip for Life course with my very tiny club, and we realized in about 2 seconds that that was the game changer we'd been looking for. That fall, we started to engage in outreaches on our campus. In other words, we would literally set up a table in the student union and engage in conversations about abortion with hundreds of pro-choice students. Fast forward to my senior year, 3 years later, and my club had exploded in size. Pro-life students had come out of the woodwork, some of them formerly pro-choice. And we were all out there every single week having these conversations at our table, talking to more and more pro-choice students. So we had tons of students who had become pro-life, but even more importantly than that to me, is we had seen this dramatic culture shift in how pro-choice students on our campus understood who pro-life people were and what they actually stood for. Like, I cannot tell you how many conversations I had at that table that ended with the pro-choice person saying something like, I don't know what I think right now. Like, you've given me a lot to think about and I need to go process this, but I just want to say that I really respect you. Like, I have never heard such an intelligent pro-life argument before. And like, I used to hate your club. Okay, it was a miracle if I didn't walk past your table and not stop and punch one of you. Someone actually said that to my face, that it was a miracle if they hadn't walked past your table and stopped and punched me. And I was like, thank you. I don't really know how to respond to that. I'm glad you didn't punch me. But now I actually stopped and talked to you. And I figured out that you are nothing like I thought. And I want to go tell all of my pro-choice friends that they should also come talk to you guys. Because I've just never heard anything like this before. Thank you for doing this. Not only do I respect your right to be here having these conversations as the Pro-Life Club, but I'm so glad you are, because I think every pro-choice student on our campus needs to come talk to you. It was insane. Vandalism just ended completely. Like, my senior year, we had 1 vandalism the whole year. In my freshman year, we had 13 vandalisms in 1 week. About 1 vandalism my senior year, I submitted a bias report because I am the queen of bias reports at this point. And I had a personal email back from administration within 30 minutes, A, apologizing that I was continuing to experience this kind of vandalism, B, letting me know that they were looking at the security camera footage to try to identify who had done it, C, they had actually already looked at the security camera footage and they had identified the person, and D, they were putting that person through the disciplinary process. In 30 minutes. It was insane. Thank you. I take no credit for that, by the way. I think ERI gets all the credit for that, because that would never have happened if we hadn't been out there having those conversations and actually breaking down stereotypes. Because while administration never came over and talked to me, I watched them walk by our table more times than I can count. And they were getting wind of what was happening. And suddenly, we became the most respected and professional student organization on campus. My senior year, that local pregnancy center, they came back and did their banquet at St. Olaf again. All the years in between, they had gone somewhere else because they were like, did not want to deal with that again, which I understand. My senior year, they decided to come back. There was not a single protester. Not a single one. Because students on our campus had a completely new understanding of who pro-life people were and what they stood for. Why? I think it has everything to do with the fact that I listened to pro-choice students for hours. I got to know who they were and where they were coming from and what arguments are driving their view. And I was able to respond to those things. I think there's some absolute catastrophes in the pro-life movement that pro-life people in general don't understand the modern pro-choice person and what is actually driving their view. I think there's two main ways in which we misunderstand pro-choice people. And I'm talking about one in this speech and the second one in my second speech at 3 o'clock, shameless plug. You should come. The first one is that pro-life people love to talk about the biology of the unborn. They love to. It's great. And you should absolutely know the biology of the unborn. Problem is, that is not what pro-choice people today are talking about. That's what pro-choice people back in like the 80s were talking about. Occasionally, I will meet a pro-choice person that is legitimately confused about the biology of the unborn. Usually it happens to me on TikTok, because weird people are on TikTok. But the average pro-choice person is actually talking about philosophy. They do not actually have a disagreement with the biology of the unborn. In other words, they have a disagreement about whether the unborn is a person like you and I. They don't equate human and person as meaning the same thing. Pro-life people tend to put those words together. We're like, of course it's a member of the species Homo sapiens, and so it should have the same rights as you and I. And they're like, no, those are two separate ideas. Biologically member of the species Homo sapiens does not equal person. Person is like you and I, has rights, should be protected under the law. They do not automatically equate those terms. And so most pro-choice people do not think the unborn is a person, even if they agree that the unborn is biologically human. So one of the greatest responsibilities that we have as pro-life advocates is to make a convincing argument for the personhood of the unborn, to explain why the unborn are people like you and I. And there are many valid ways to argue for that. But we use a specific one at Equal Rights Institute. It's called the equal rights argument. And the reason we use that argument as opposed to all the other ones is because this one is far more convincing to pro-choice people than literally any other personhood argument we have ever tested and tried. It kind of became a running joke at ERI. Like back in 2013 is when this argument was developed. And they would go out and test it on college campuses. And it was changing so many minds that it became this running joke. Like we'd sit and do debriefs after a day of outreach and people would share stories about how their conversations went. And first person would be like, hey, I had 2 people change their minds today. And be like, what happened? Tell me why did they change their mind? And they're like, well, I used the equal rights argument. And then the next person was like, hey, me too. I had 2 people change their minds because of the equal rights argument. And the third person was like, also had to try and change because of the equal rights argument. You can see where this is going. It was craziness. We had never seen any pro-life argument change as many minds as this one. That's why we use this specific argument as opposed to all of the other personhood arguments that are out there. It's helpful to know more than one. I'm not saying don't know other personhood arguments, but I believe that this is the most powerful one for today's pro-choice people. Now that I have your curiosity majorly piqued, before I tell you how to make the equal rights argument, I want to tell you when you should use the equal rights argument. Basically, anytime a pro-choice person says a vague phrase about the value of the unborn child's life, they might say, well, no one knows when life begins. Or they might say, well, a fetus isn't a person, or a fetus isn't human, or a fetus isn't the same thing as a toddler if you just use the trot of the toddler tool, if you know that tool. Any of those kinds of phrases, basically anytime you understand that the pro-choice person thinks abortion is fine, because the unborn is not a full person like you or I, that's when you should use the equal rights argument. Anytime I hear one of those vague phrases, the first thing I do is I ask them a clarification question. I say, I want to understand your view, but I'm not sure what you meant when you said no one knows when life begins, or whatever phrase it was that they used. Did you mean that no one knows when biological life begins? Or did you mean from something more philosophical? Like, we don't know when a person begins to exist. I've asked this question to literally thousands of pro-choice students. Do you want to know how many answered the former, that they were talking about biology? Like 3, not percent, total. Okay, all of them say this thing, that they were actually talking about something philosophical. And so that is the moment that I will launch into the equal rights argument. You can learn how to make this argument in really 4 simple steps, and we're going to break them down. Step 1 is to step away from the question of abortion. Now, this probably seems like a really weird thing to do in a conversation about abortion. I get that, but it's actually going to be really helpful because it's going to help you show the pro-choice person that they think differently about abortion than literally any other issue. It's also going to help them feel more calmed down if they're feeling intense, because we're going to go talk about something that they probably care a lot about: equality. Every average person around my age is super passionate about equality and equity and diversity and inclusion and all of those buzzwords. So if I'm going to use that to my advantage, okay, we're going to go talk about something they're really passionate about. We're going to talk about equality. However, it's really important to ask the pro-choice person if that's okay, if we can take a break from talking about abortion, because I don't want them to feel like we're dodging the question or something. Like, I want them to know this has a purpose. And so I will say something like, can we put abortion on the shelf for a minute so I can understand how you think about rights more generally? Like, we'll come back to abortion in a minute. They will always say yes, every single time. Then I'm going to ask them if they think that equality is important, specifically asking them about the right to life or the right to protection from violence. There's a couple different ways I might do that. I might say, do you believe in equal rights for all people? Do you think equality is important? Do you think people deserve an equal right to life? Do you think it's important for people to have equal protection from violence? That's my personal favorite. That's the one I usually use. Do you think it's important for people to have an equal protection from violence? Choose whichever one of those feels most comfortable to you, but this is the one that I usually use. If they say yes, which they will, then the first thing you need to do is point out that you agree. And don't just do it in like a single sentence, yes, I agree with you, moving on. No, they don't believe that. That does not sound genuine. I will go on for several minutes about how important I think equality is. I'll say something like, I think there's a lot of situations in history where we can look where we have gotten this question wrong. We have not protected people that should have been protected. We've not successfully figured out who should have rights and who shouldn't, or who should be protected from violence and who shouldn't. We've had all these arbitrary things like, well, if you're not male, then you don't get the same rights, or if you're the wrong race, you don't get the same rights. Like, we've messed this up so many times. I think it's really important that we try to figure out what actually is the answer. And so I'm with you. Equality, super important. I will talk about that for several minutes before I finally move on to my actual argument, which starts in step 2. So step 1 is we take a break from abortion. We step away from the question of abortion for a second. And step 2, we're going to sort who is in and who is out. In other words, I'm going to establish this idea of an equal right to life community or a club. I usually use club. You can use community. You can use circle. You can use room. I don't really care. The Equal Right to Life Club is this idea of a group of entities. I'm deliberately using super vague language here. It's a group of entities who should have an equal right to life or an equal right to be protected from violence. So any entity that should have an equal right to be protected from violence would be in the Equal Right to Life Club. And any entity that does not have an equal right to be protected from violence would be out of the Equal Right to Life Club. You tracking with me? So I'm going to set up this idea in the conversation. And so there's a really obvious question here, which is, what entities get access to this club? And so we're going to try to sort who should be in and who is out. Essentially, I'm going to provide different examples of entities that either should or shouldn't be in the club and see what they think. And we're going to work together to try to determine what entities are in and what entities are out. I will always start with obvious examples. Like, the very first thing I'm going to do is human adults. I'm going to be like, I'm pretty sure we agree on this, but just go with me for a second. I'm assuming that you think you and we should have an equal right to life. Like, it'd be equally wrong if somebody killed either of us. They're going to be like, yeah, of course. I'm like, cool, glad we're on the same page. If you didn't agree with that, I'd feel a little less emotionally safe right now. And I'll make a joke slightly like that. And so no one has ever disagreed with me that you and I should have an equal right to life. And also I'll expand it, and I'll say, what about all human adults? And just to clarify, we're talking about literally all human adults. Like, regardless of their race or their gender or their sexual orientation or their whatever, insert all of the things. It is equally wrong to kill human adults. And they will agree with me. And so then I move on and I ask them about another thing. I say, what about human newborns? I have never had a pro-choice person in real life tell me that they think that human newborns should not have an equal right to life, that it's okay to kill human newborns. Those pro-choice people do exist. They're super rare. They're usually like very advanced philosophers that think in order to be a person, you have to have super advanced capacities that newborns don't even have, and therefore they think it's okay to kill newborns. I've never met someone like that in real life. I'm not actually convinced that anyone really thinks that, unless they're just like an academic who has to believe that to be consistent on their view. So if someone says to me they think that newborns actually should not be in the Equal Right to Life Club, I can usually jar them out of that pretty fast. It's never actually happened. The last one now that I'm gonna ask them about, and this might be a little weird, but just go with me for a second. What about squirrels? Like, actually consider it. Should squirrels be in the Equal Right to Life Club? I have never talked to a pro-choice person in real life who actually thought that squirrels should be in. This is usually where I clarify. Let me be super clear about what the Equal Right to Life Club is. It is a club in which everything inside has an equal right to life. That doesn't mean that things outside of it have no rights. Like, I think squirrels do have some level of rights. We should not go around torturing squirrels for fun. That would be weird and gross. Please do not do that. So maybe they belong in this some other circle that's like the some rights circle. And pro-choice people usually agree with me there. They're like, yeah, animals are like over here in this other club that like you shouldn't kill them for fun, but if you kill them by accident, it's okay or whatever, as opposed to the Equal Right to Life Club that the human adults and the human newborns are in. We're usually on the same page there. And sometimes, if we're not, I'll make a little joke to prove that we actually are on the same page. I'll say, if you're right, if squirrels really are the same as you or I, then I'm in big trouble. Because I did once run over a squirrel with my car. Okay, I did not mean to. I was driving home from class one day, and I saw this squirrel that did this completely idiotic move and just like ran out in the middle of the road like squirrels do sometimes, and I tried to swerve, but I didn't miss. And I like felt the car do this whole like up-down thing, and I looked in my rearview mirror and I wanted the squirrel to be dead. Like, I did not want him to be suffering like Scrat from Ice Age. Unfortunately, he was very dead. But I didn't like pull over and try to perform squirrel CPR. That would be really weird. But imagine I told that exact same story, except instead of a squirrel, it was a toddler that had run out into the road chasing a toy. The first time I told that story, it was funny. That's not funny anymore. No one actually thinks that squirrels and toddlers are the same. I'm okay with granting animals some rights. I have a lot of common ground with animal rights activists. I think there are problems with the ways that some animals are treated in factory farms. Like, I have so much common ground there. They are not the same as human adults or human newborns. And I've never actually talked to a pro-choice person in real life that thought they were the same. So, we've sorted who is in and who is out, focusing deliberately on very obvious cases. I'm focusing deliberately on human adults, human newborns, and squirrels. There are other places you could go here. You could ask about people who are dying and transition this conversation into something about euthanasia, which is also an important conversation to talk about, but I don't think that's actually helpful here, because I want to stick with my conversation about abortion first. I think pro-choice people are very, very excited to go debate someone about assisted suicide or euthanasia because they're way more confident about that position than they are about being pro-life. So let me finish my abortion argument first, and then I'll happily go talk about those other things. Like, no problem. But let's not get off track here with where we are right now. So I deliberately just use the term all human adults, and I don't like specifically bring up the euthanasia conversation. If they really want to go there, I'm happy to go there, that's fine. I'm also deliberately not talking about really complicated philosophical things at this point. Like, I don't bring up aliens or Vulcans from Star Trek or dolphins or gorillas, okay? I want to stick with really obvious things. No one thinks a squirrel is the same as you and I, okay? So sticking with human adults, human newborns, and squirrels. Then we're gonna solve for X. In other words, I've created this really obvious question. We've been sorting who gets in and who gets out of this club. And so the obvious question is, what is causing certain entities to get into this club and others to not get into this club? Like, there must be a reason why some entities are in the Equal Right to Life Club and some things are out. So let's call the thing that gives you entry into this club X. What do you think X could be? I will ask the pro-choice person. And they will always start providing some answers. And I have to test them with what we already know. There's a couple things we already know. We know whatever this is has to be able to explain why human adults are in, human newborns are in, and squirrels are out. We also know that X cannot be something on a spectrum. It can't be something that you have more or less of, because otherwise it wouldn't explain why we have an equal right to life. So intelligence, for example, cannot explain why we have an equal right to life, because we are not all equally intelligent. If you don't believe me, just go to YouTube and start reading the comments, okay? We are not all equally intelligent. That is okay. I am pro equal right to life for obnoxious people on the internet. All I am saying is that intelligence cannot explain why we have an equal right to life, because we are not all equally intelligent. So it can't be a dimmer switch. It can't be a thing you can have more or less of. It has to be an on or off, a thing you have or you don't have, that explains why you have an equal right to life. When the pro-choice person provides me with what they think that is, I am always testing it in my head with those things we already know. And there will always be a problem. As our friend Trent Horn says, pro-choice definitions of personhood either include too many things, like squirrels, or they will exclude too many things, like newborns. And so I have to do this mental test in my head every time that the pro-choice person provides an answer to say, is this including squirrels? Is this excluding newborns? And then I will point out that problem. So let's go over some of the most common answers that I hear from pro-choice people to this question, what is X? The ability to think. And by that, I mean the ability to have mental processes at all. Would that include human adults? Yes. Would that include human newborns? Yes, they can have mental processes. Would that exclude squirrels? No. Squirrels can have mental processes. Problem. The ability to think cannot explain why you were a person. Here's another one. The ability to feel pain. And by that, I mean the physical feeling caused by disease, injury, or something hurts the body. We're like simplifying this definition down to be a thing that more things can experience, okay? So would that include human adults? Yes. Would that include human newborns? Yes. Would that exclude squirrels? No. Squirrels can feel pain, as can basically the entire animal kingdom. Now, some pro-life people like to bring up that there actually are rare cases of human adults that cannot feel pain. Like Gabby Gingras and other people with hereditary sensory and autonomic neuropathy type 5. Had to look at my notes for that one. That is true. There are real human adults that cannot feel pain. They are still persons, and so that disproves the idea that the ability to feel pain is what makes you a person. I've just not found that very convincing to tell pro-choice people. Because pro-choice people tend to think of rare people like Gabby Gingras as more of an exception to the rule, as opposed to something that actually disproves the rule. So I found it way more convincing to bring up that basically the entire animal kingdom can feel pain than to just point to rare cases of human adults. Okay, here's another one. Self-awareness. And by that, I mean the ability to reflect on your own existence at all. Does that include human adults? Yes. Does that include human newborns? No. Newborns are not self-aware. The most basic form of self-awareness starts at about 4 months old, when newborns start to know their own body as like a physical object. But if you're using that definition, the ability to reflect on your own existence, that doesn't start until about 18 months old. Remember when I said that there are rare pro-choice philosophers that will say it's okay to kill newborns? That's why. They think that there's a very advanced qualification of what makes you a person, and it's a thing that newborns don't have either. So in order to be consistent in their view, they have to say it's okay to kill newborns. Here's another one, viability. And by that I mean the ability to survive outside of a uterus. Does that include human adults? Yes. Does that include human newborns? Literally by definition. Does that exclude squirrels? No. It would exclude squirrel fetuses, but basically the entire animal kingdom lives outside of a uterus. Now, as a side note, this is often a place where I find myself making a different argument. I will say, I think of all the lines that you could have picked for what is X, viability is a weird one to me because it's the only moving target. Like, we have babies that were viable today that weren't viable 30 years ago. And so it makes no sense to say that a 25-week-old fetus is a person today, but a 25-year-old fetus, 30 years ago was not a person. That makes absolutely no sense. Like, of all the lines, this is the only moving target one. And so it seems to me to be the least plausible definition of what actually makes you a person. Last one, Sentience. And by that I mean the minimal ability to perceive the world around you. Does that include human adults? Yes. Does that include human newborns? Yes. Does that exclude squirrels? No! Squirrels are very clearly sentient. Okay, there's certain types of squirrels, eastern gray and eastern fox squirrels mainly, that will collect their nuts for the winter. And then they'll go store them all over a 7-acre area. And they memorize where each of the spots are, and they only go out to them one at a time when they're hungry because they want to hide them from the other squirrels. I couldn't do that. I couldn't memorize where I hid all my nuts over a 7-acre area. Goodness gracious. Squirrels are very sentient. Last step. So we've stepped away from abortion. We've sorted who is in and who is out. We've tried to solve for X. If they haven't already asked you, it's time to share your solution. In other words, share what you think X is. I'll say something like this. I think the only thing that works with what we already know from our sorting process is something like human nature. It's the only thing that everyone in the community shares equally. And so to bring abortion back into it, that's why I think embryos should be protected from violence. They have that same thing that the rest of us in the community share. And so I think they must be included. Now, I want you to notice what I'm saying the definition is. I think X is something like human nature. I am being deliberately vague here. I don't think it is precisely human nature. And whenever I teach this argument to pro-life people, they're like, that's way too vague. Pro-choice people are going to ask about it. I have never once had a pro-choice person ask. It's wild. They're like, that just totally makes sense to me. I'm like, I think it's something like human nature. And they're like, yes, wow, that's amazing. And then they change their mind. And I'm like, I really thought you were going to ask what I meant by something like human nature, but they don't. I'm being deliberately vague because I think it is something like human nature, but it's a deeper philosophical term. And the average pro-choice person does not want to get into advanced philosophy about persons. They just don't. If they do, if you're talking to a pro-choice philosophy professor, we do have a definition for what something like human nature is. And you will find that in our Equip for Life course. If you're not already one of those amazing people in this room that has taken our Equip for Life course, you should fix that problem. And you can purchase access to our Equip for Life course. Ortal also is awesome, and they provide tons of these to their staff and their volunteers and their supporters. And so you might already, if you're one of those people, have an account through Ortal, which is amazing and fantastic. We love Ortal so much. But you can also purchase it for yourself if you want to, and you get 25% off if you use that code at equalrightsinstitute.com. Module 10 of that course is where we will answer the precise question of what do we mean by something like human nature. It's like an hour-and-a-half lesson on super advanced philosophy. If that's what you're into, go for it. Have a great time. I love it. I think it's fun. But the average pro-choice person is never going to ask about that. And so what I do to make the equal rights argument is essentially show them that in order to be pro-equality, they have to also be pro-life. Because I think the only logical way to justify equality for all human adults and all human newborns, and not squirrels, is to realize that something like our human nature grants equal rights. And so if the unborn have that, which spoiler alert, they do, then that means abortion would have to be wrong. If I can connect something they're already passionate about, equality, to the idea of being pro-life, then it makes sense why I think that abortion is the biggest human rights violation of our time. Because it is legalized killing of people who should be in the Equal Right to Life Club who are currently being denied that. And that's a major problem. And that's where I see the light bulb go off for most pro-choice people. We've gone over a lot of material, so I want to give you a really fast review, and then we're going to move on to Q&A. Step one, you're going to step away from the question of abortion and ask them if they think that equality is important, and then I'm going to affirm that I agree equality is important. Step two, I'm sorting who is in and who is out of this equal right to life community that I have created, focusing mainly on human adults, human newborns, and squirrels. Step three, we're going to solve for X. I'm going to ask that pro-choice person what kinds of things they think X could be. And I'm going to try to determine in my own mind what the problem is with their argument. Does it have a squirrel problem or a newborn problem? And then I'm going to point that out to them in a very not snarky way. Just be like, I feel like this has this issue. What do you think about that? Or like, it's very conversational. I'm not trying to be weird or snarky in how I explain it. Last but not least, if they haven't already asked, and feel free to jump to this step if you need to at any point if they do actually ask. Like, I'm more than happy to give my answer. I'm going to share my solution and explain that I think something like human nature is the only thing that makes sense with what we already know, And therefore, that's why I think abortion is wrong. Ultimately, I am against abortion not because I want to punish people for having sex. That is not the point. I am pro-life because I'm pro-equality and I'm anti-violence. I think that we shouldn't be killing human persons. And I think the only logical way to think this through is to determine the unborn are human persons. And so they should be worthy of that same dignity and protection from violence that you and I get. That is the equal rights argument in a nutshell. I have 13 whole minutes for Q&A. Congratulations. I was supposed to give you 15 minutes, but I went 2 minutes over. I'm so sorry. Hopefully you'll forgive me. So, any questions? I will happily take raised hands. I'm not scary, I promise. And I'm also here all day, by the way. I have a booth out in the main area, if you hadn't seen that already, giant Equal Rights Institute sign. So you can come talk to me anytime you want. Come grab any of my business cards. We have free stickers. We have all sorts of fun things. So questions now. Otherwise, you can also feel free to stop by me later. Yes, right there.
Seniors, I think, should be included in your club.
So I think they are automatically included in my club. When I talk about all human adults, I am including seniors in all human adults.
For the whole spectrum, you've got newborns, and then at the other end would be seniors.
That's true. The main reason I don't specifically ask about seniors is just so I make sure I keep this conversation on topic right now, and we can go talk about euthanasia later in the conversation with this pro-choice person, because that's usually where that would go. But I think they're automatically included in all human adults. The only reason I specifically ask about human newborns is because they can be a lot less clear sometimes. Like, human newborns are just so dependent, and they seem different, and they're really incapable of doing a lot of things mentally, and they just came out of the womb 2 seconds ago. And so I specifically ask about them to help the pro-choice person kind of bridge that gap. And I think human adults would include seniors automatically. I mean, seniors are adults. And so I don't make a separate category for that. I see, oh, I have a no card question over here. Amazing. Oh, is there a way to get a paper copy of the course? Yes, sort of, is my answer to that. So the course itself is a combination of online video modules and a workbook that comes with it. We actually just redid our workbook. So if you're somebody that took the Equip for Life course years ago, you should go look at the new workbook because it's so nice. Back when I first took the Equip for Life course in college, it was an awkward PDF, Word document that was not super helpful. Just because I had other priorities at that point and also didn't have an amazing graphic designer, which we do now. And so our new Equip for Life course workbook basically outlines each of the lessons, what you would have learned in the videos. So if you're someone that's like, I cannot stand watching video at all, you could still get most of the content by just reading the workbook. Okay, you'd basically be able to do that. But I encourage you to watch the videos and use the workbook along with it. It'll give you the outline bullet point version. It also includes discussion questions, activities, if you're leading this in a group. All of that is there for you. It's really meant to be an interactive experience learning the course. And so if you can learn it with other people, maybe you're the president of a County Right to Life group. A lot of the County Right to Life groups in the state have gone through our Equip for Life course, and they often do it in groups. And that's the best way to do it. I think if you get a group of people together, you watch the videos, you do those discussion questions, you use the practice dialogue prompts in the workbook, that's gonna help you really retain this material. But if you wanna go through it on your own, you can watch the videos on your own. You can use the workbook by yourself and just read the bullet points, get it through. As a side note, you can also download just the audio of the videos as podcasts. So if you're a very just audio person or you wanna listen to it on the treadmill or something, I don't know, you can download the MP3 versions and just listen to it. Yes? So where would we find the course? The video. Yes. So if you go to equalrightsinstitute.com, here, I'll pull that. Oh, that is the slide up right now. Wow. Okay. So if you go to equalrightsinstitute.com right on the bottom, there's a tab called Pro-Life Content. And you will find there links to all of our different things. So we have a huge blog. You'll find a link to that there. You will find a link to the 2 courses. It will say courses, and you can click on that. There's also a link to our podcasts. We have 2 podcasts. I'm the co-host of one of them with Josh Fromm, our president, executive director. And we also have links to all our social media pages, links to our YouTube channel. All of the places you can find our pro-life content is on the giant button called Pro-Life Content. Super self-explanatory. Yes?
Emily, thank you very much. That was excellent. Question, engaging the 148 out of the 150. I know your arguments are here for probably the non-believer, but still very valid arguments. My question is for the 148 out of 150. Now, I am doing a little session at 3 o'clock in the engaging your church, but that's my question for you. And if I could just, real briefly, since we have time, just read from 2 Timothy. Refuse foolish and ignorant speculations when they produce quarrels. The Lord's bondservant must not be quarrelsome, but be kind to all, able to teach, patient when wrong, with gentleness, why with gentleness, correcting those who are in opposition. Perhaps God may grant them repentance leading to the knowledge of truth, that they may come to their senses and escape the snare of the devil, having been held captive by him to do his will. Do we not need to encourage the church to realize that those people that you're discussing with, truth with, are prisoners of war? They're not the enemy. We need to view them as being made in God's image and treat them as such, love them as such, and understand that their minds are an enemy's hand. Is that not true?
That is absolutely true. So I think it's super important for our churches to actually be willing to talk about abortion in their congregations from the pulpit, like actually having these conversations and making these arguments, because we do know statistically Christians are having abortions at an alarming rate. Catholics are having abortions at an alarming rate. And so we need to be having these conversations, and we need to help our churches, especially our pro-life pastors and priests, to realize that having these conversations are important, and that I do believe there is spiritual warfare going on, and we need to actually be able to reach those people whose minds are currently in the hands of the enemy, as you said. One of my absolute favorite verses that inspires me when I think about how to effectively engage about abortion is Corinthians chapter 4, verses 5 through 6. It says, "Yourself with wisdom towards outsiders, making the most of the opportunity. Let your speech always be with grace, as though seasoned with salt, so that you will know how you should respond to each person." I think that is how Jesus would be if he was here today talking about abortion with us. I think he would do that. I think he would conduct himself with wisdom towards outsiders, making the most of the opportunity. He would not just avoid talking about abortion because it's too controversial, which is what way too many of our pastors and priests do. He would not do that. But, what's the second part? He would speak with wisdom and grace, and he would know how he should respond to each person. That, to me, is the key. He wouldn't just respond to some pro-choice stereotype he has in his head of like what stupid pro-choice people over there think. No, he would get to know the pro-choice people standing right in front of him and what was driving their view, what their needs and their concerns are. He would get to know that and respond to that. And so I think ultimately that's what I want our churches to be like. I want our churches to not be afraid to talk about abortion because it's too controversial, because I don't think that's what Jesus would do. But they would get to know what's driving the views of people in their congregation. And they would respond to that. They would do this on a very personal level. They would actually engage in these conversations, which, by the way, is what I think our whole society needs to do, but especially our churches. Yes?
Instead of the verbiage, argue persuasively, why not have it say dialogue persuasively? And then my second question is, where can I get the hardback version or like a physical copy of the work?
Great question. So let me answer the second part first, because that's easy. You can print it off of the website. So we have, if you go log into your Quit for Life course account, or if you don't have one, come see me and I'll hook you up. But if you go in, the very first module is workbook. And you can click on it and download it to your computer and print it. You can also just go under literally any video in the course, and there's a little link that says workbook. So we try to make it super easy for you to find. You should be able to download it to your printer and print it, and no problem. If you have problems with that, email me, no issue. I can help you out. Answering your first question, which I have now forgotten. Oh, argue persuasively as opposed to dialogue persuasively. Yes, that is a great question that I don't 100% know the answer to because I wasn't around when that slogan was invented. The reason I can guess, however, is that I think it resonates with pro-life people, and we're trying to reach pro-life people and be like, let me help you make better arguments. And so if I use the term argue persuasively, that brings a lot of pro-life people in who might already be in a little more of a hostile camp environment where they're like, I want to defeat the pro-choice people. Those are the people I'm trying to reach. I'm trying to help them be like, actually, that's not the most effective way to do this. And so if we use terminology like think clearly, reason honestly, and argue persuasively, that hits a lot of different people. And it shows that we are trying to do this in the most effective way possible, I think. We're trying to, yes, argue for the position. I don't think argue has to mean screaming. Argue in its like actual what the word means just means like to explain and defend a position, which is ultimately what I'm doing. It just has connotations in today's society. But if I can use those connotations to reach these people while also using the open-mindedness language, that makes us really intriguing as an organization. I think it brings a lot more people in. I see we have another note card. I probably have time for one more question after this one. So if you want to be that one, oh, claimed. Okay, so here we go. What happens when your opponent does not play by your rules and makes it unsafe? Intensely emotional, presents arguments that have already been presented. I'm not sure what the last sentence says because handwriting, but I think I know basically what you're saying. So what do I do if I'm in a conversation where someone is being openly hostile to me? I am really good at disarming that, purely I think because I'm willing to take it for a little while. And I am not telling you that you should be willing to do that. You need to have your own boundary. But I go and do outreaches on college campuses all the time, and I have had people scream at me. I'm okay with that. But that's always at the beginning of a conversation. And so they come up, they're super upset, and I understand, especially with what's happening right now. Like between Dobbs and Texas, pro-choice people are feeling very personally threatened. And so if they want to come up and scream at me, like maybe that's what they need right now. They just need to get it out. I'm willing to take that for a limited amount of time. But they can scream at me for like 5 straight minutes. That's fine. And I've had that happen. At which point I am using lots of tools to make them start to calm down. Mainly I'm actually to them. I'm not interrupting them, which is exactly what they're expecting. And when they kind of get to the end of their rant and they seem to be slowing down, I'll ask them a clarification question. And they start to realize that I was actually paying attention. I actually cared about them and what words were coming out of their mouth. And that gets them into a very different place. The best conversations I've ever had with pro-choice people have been with those hostile people that screamed at me for the first 5 minutes, realized it wasn't what they thought, and then we ended up talking for like another 45 minutes. It's very rare, it does happen, that I have to end a conversation with someone. I just had to do it about 2 weeks ago. I was doing an outreach at the University of Minnesota Duluth, where Father Mike Schmitz is, if you know him. I was doing an event there, and I spoke with a pro-choice couple, actually, who were very angry at me. And they screamed at me for about 10 minutes. And I finally said, look, I don't think that we're really going to get anywhere here, because I'm here because I want to have more productive political dialogues, because I think people really are bad at talking to people across the other side, and it doesn't seem like that's what you're interested in. It doesn't seem like you're interested in having good political dialogues. It seems like you're just interested in yelling at me, and I've tried to ask some questions to understand your view, but it doesn't seem like we're going to really get anywhere. So thanks for stopping by. If you come back and you have any questions later, like more than happy to chat with you, but have a nice day. And I'll just move on to another conversation. I have like 30 seconds. Go. No, we have not. We have no problems on any of our channels. Occasionally, one of my videos on TikTok will go under review. I'm the face of our TikTok at ERI, which is our biggest social media, wildly enough. We have almost 1 million views on TikTok. And occasionally, one of my videos will get flagged to go under review if a pro-choice person tries to report it for hate speech or something. And usually, within about 30 minutes, TikTok will put it back to being public. They just have to review it. But we've never had any issues with big tech or whatever actually trying to censor our content. They might review it quickly and be like, yeah, this is fine, and then they'll put it right back out there. So that's not been an experience that we've had, which I'm really grateful for. I am more than happy to stay and answer any more questions people have. Come chat me up at the table, but it is time for me to let you go to some more things. So thank you very much.